Today, we are going to explore an idea that basically flips conventional wisdom completely on its head. What if all that chaos and uncertainty we're taught to fear wasn't the enemy? What if your organization could be built not just to survive shocks, but to actually get stronger from them? Let's dive right in. So let's just start with that big question right there. We spend our entire careers trying to manage risk, avoid volatility, and predict the future. But what if that's only half the picture? What if there's a way to build things, companies, teams, careers, that don't just endure stress, but actually thrive on it? All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with something called the prediction trap. Then we'll define exactly what anti-fragility means. After that, we'll compare what fragile and anti-fragile organizations actually look like. Then, the fun part, we'll give you a practical toolkit. And finally, we'll talk about what all this means for you as a leader. Okay, first stop on our map, the prediction trap. This is hands down the biggest and often invisible problem with how most of us think about risk. Think about it. So much of business strategy is built on forecasting, right? Predicting sales, market shifts, the next big thing. It's like building your house to withstand a very specific kind of earthquake. But the events that really change the world, the so-called black swans, they're never the ones we predict. They're the ones we never saw coming. All that forecasting, it just gives us a false sense of security and makes us prepare for completely the wrong storm. The author Nassim Taleb actually has this perfect term for people who get caught in this trap. He calls them a fragilista. This is the expert, the planner, the consultant who genuinely believes they can predict and engineer all the randomness out of the system. But in doing so, they end up creating these incredibly fragile organizations that look super stable on the surface, but are just waiting to shatter at the first unexpected shock. Okay, so if trying to predict everything is a trap, what's the alternative? Well, it's not about getting a better crystal ball. It's about building a system that doesn't even need one. And that brings us to the absolute core concept of this whole thing: anti-fragility. So let's break this down, because anti-fragile is a very specific thing. It's not just about being tough or resilient. The best analogy is your muscles. When you go to the gym and you stress them, they don't just repair back to how they were. They actually grow back stronger. That is anti-fragility. It's a system that literally feeds on volatility, on randomness, on stressors. This chart here shows what Taleb calls the triad of volatility. And this distinction is absolutely crucial. So, on one end, you've got the fragile. Think of a wire glass. Under stress, it shatters. Simple. In the middle, you have the robust. Think of a steel block. It can take a hit, it resists stress, and it stays the same. But here's the key. On the far end, you have the anti-fragile. It doesn't just resist the stress, it gets better because of it. And let's be honest, in a world that is constantly changing, just staying the same is not a winning strategy. Yeah, this image really captures it. I mean, think about evolution. It is the ultimate anti-fragile process. All those random mutations and environmental stressors, they aren't bugs in the system. They are the system. That's the very mechanism that drives adaptation and improvement. The entire ecosystem doesn't just endure stress. It is literally built by it. All right, so let's pull this out of the world of theory and get practical. What does a fragile company actually look like day to day compared to an anti-fragile one? Let's check out the blueprint. This table gives us a fantastic side-by-side. Fragile systems, they're rigid, top-down, and optimized for one single forecast. They hate errors, they hide them, and they see any kind of volatility as the enemy. Anti-fragile systems, totally different beast. They're flexible, they see errors not as failures but as priceless information, and they don't even try to predict the future. Instead, they just focus on being ready for any future by making themselves less vulnerable. And here's the great paradox of modern management. In our relentless quest for efficiency and stability, we often accidentally make our organizations weaker. By protecting everyone from small stresses, by hiding little failures, we prevent our teams from ever learning, adapting, and building the muscles they need to survive a truly big, catastrophic event. We're trading long-term survival for short-term quiet. So the big question is, how do we actually build this? All right, let's get practical. Let's open up the toolkit and see what you can start using today. So the very first step is diagnosis. This is all about applying a powerful idea called via negativa, which is just a fancy way of saying we improve things not by adding stuff, but by removing what's harmful. So ask yourself, where does everything in my business depend on one person, one client, one supplier? Where are we blindly trusting a forecast? And where have we optimized a process so much that there is zero room for error? Just finding and removing those fragile points is where you start building real strength. Once you've spotted the fragile areas, you start applying these core strategies. First, embrace redundancy. That backup system, that cross-train employee, that's not waste, it's essential insurance. Second, seek out small stressors. This is a biological thing called hormesis. A small dose of a stressor, kind of like a vaccine, makes the whole system stronger. So challenge your teams with small, manageable problems. And finally, you have to learn from failure. Reframe every single mistake as a free lesson in how to get better. Okay, this is a brilliant strategic tool. It's called the barbell strategy. The idea is to completely avoid the mushy medium-risk middle ground. Instead, you play at the extremes. On one end of the barbell, you are hyper-conservative, say 90% of your resources are in safe, predictable assets. That's your survival fund. But on the other end, with that last 10%, you take small, calculated, high-risk, high-reward bets. Think about Amazon. Their core retail business is the safe end, but their early investment in something like AWS was that small, risky bet that had a world-changing payoff. You know, when you really get down to it, this isn't just a clever business strategy. For anyone in a position of leadership, this is really an ethical responsibility. The most important takeaway here is an ethical one, and it's an idea that's as old as civilization itself: accountability. A leader who builds a fragile system, one where they get all the rewards in the good times, but their employees or their customers are the ones who suffer when it breaks, that leader is failing their duty. True anti-fragile leadership demands that you have skin in the game. It means you are personally exposed to the downside of your own decisions, not just the upside. It's about shifting your entire focus from hitting next quarter's target to ensuring the long-term survival of the whole system. It's about building something that will outlast you. And so that leaves us with one last question for you to think about. As you go about your day making decisions, ask yourself, are you accidentally making your organization more fragile by smoothing out every little bump in the road? Or are you building an organization that, just like a living thing, gets stronger, smarter, and more capable with every single challenge it faces? The choice is yours. Thanks for watching.